Hey everybody, we are working on lesson 3 in the 2015 version of Adobe Illustrator CC Classroom in a Book. I will be doing these videos to help you understand the processes more. So I've already downloaded my files, and we're going to work this kind of out of order. We're going to complete certain parts at a time before we move on. So I have opened up my end file, which is in the downloads. And you can see we kind of have a spaceship thing going on over here. The lesson is called Using Shapes to Create Artwork for a Postcard. So we're going to get started. So I'm following on with the textbook. This is intended to be a complementary to the textbook. It's not a substitution. You should still follow along with the textbook. I'll name page numbers as I go on. So we're on page 78, creating a new document. Let me make sure I'm in Adobe Illustrator and not QuickTime. So into File, New, and it says Name Postcard. Now usually there's a name for you to rename a file and getting started or create a new file. So keep a lookout for that. So you have proper naming file techniques. And since I'm submitting this to a grade, theoretically, I want to kind of name it because I will get hundreds of postcards. So I'm doing first initial, last name, underscore, postcard. I'm going to change my profile to print. Says artboards 2, and it says arrangement. We want it to be arranged by row, and if I hover over and match the icon in the text, it's there, and I'm going to click this so it's going to the right. So each time we add a new artboard, it will move on to the right. I'm going to change my units from points to inches. Change the spacing to 1, and it says the document size width is going to be 6 and the height's going to be 4.25. Bleed, I'm going to keep that 0, and color mode CMYK, raster effects 300. I'm going to click OK, and it's going to create a new document. As you can see, they're kind of tabbed where I can go back and forth. I'm going to keep this one open so I can check it for my progress. So in our first video lesson, we're going to focus on building this satellite and this sort of rock moon shape. But we're going to start off with setting our document even a bit more. We're going to go to File, Save As. So this document is saved where I need it to be. I want to make sure I put it in the right folder. So at any point I can just do a Command S or Control S to save my progress. If you haven't experienced it yet, Adobe Illustrator can and will crash on you. So save often. So it wants us to set up a bleed. Now we could have done this before, but we're going to go do it in the document setup in our control panel. So I'm going to click here on our document setup, and over bleed it's going to do it in 1/8 of an inch, 0.125. And since I selected it here, it changes all of the elements because this lock is selected and it's going to keep everything the same. Typically you want to keep it the same, that's why it's always selected. If sometimes your client will have you move things around. Click OK. I'm going to show you one other thing. We can always add new artboards. So in our panels, I'm going to pull up the artboard, which is these 2 windows. Each time I click this new page icon, it builds a new artboard to the next because it went by row. I'm just going to Command and delete those 2. I only need 2 at the moment, but if I ever need more artboards, I can definitely adjust them there. I can also go into Document Setup, Edit Artboards, and I can drag the location of my artboards if I need them to be reordered. Command Z just to get out of there. So we're going to work with basic shapes to create these things. Adobe Illustrator is great for simple illustrations with basic shapes. The book talks about open paths and closed paths. I will do a separate video kind of going more in depth on that as well. So we're going to create our first rectangle. So in our panels, we're going to have our rectangle tool right here, keyboard shortcut M, and it wants us to draw it the size of a 1.25 wide and 1.5 high. So I'm going to draw it out. So the width is 1.25. As you can see, this little gray box to the right is our measurement label, which tells us the physical size of everything that we're creating. Awesome. So we have our first shape. And I'm going to go to our selection tool, keyboard shortcut A. I can drag it around. I can play around with it, which is pretty cool. And since it's default, our fill is white and our stroke is black. So we're going to create another rectangle by using measurement guide. So I'm going to go back to keyboard shortcut M, and you see my cursor or crosshair, and I'm just going to click anywhere on the artboard. It opens this dialog box, and I can put in an exact measurement size, which is pretty helpful. So let's say I didn't measure it exact as I want. I can always kind of redo another one. So let's do 1.25, and remember it rounds up, so. And now I have two rectangle shapes kind of worked together. So with one of the rectangles selected, the one we just created, what we're going to do is drag it around. As you can see, we move them around and they're kind of lined up together. And with that magenta, and that's going to be their smart guide. If that's not shown for you, you gotta view smart guides, make sure that is checked right there. And that's kind of how we adjust those measurements. And what we're going to do is kind of resize it. So we're going to take our cursor, our selection tool to the right or left of it, and we're going to hold down a modifier. You can do Option drag for Mac or Alt drag for Windows. And we're going to drag this till we see a width of 0.7. And this is actually using exact measurements to kind of shrink it, which is pretty helpful. Now we're going to do a transformation. I can go to Window, Transform, or while this shape is selected, I can click Transform to pull it up in those panels. And I'm going to make sure the width and height is exactly 0.7. And I'm going to change that height to 0.1. And now I have a smaller shape. And I can close that transform panel. And I'm just going to leave that there for now. I don't really need it at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to round some corners. So we're going to select on that other rectangle. I'm going to just zoom in, Command plus, so we can see it more. And you see these little widgets in the corner. And if my cursor goes over, it kind of has a rounded edge. And I can drag them in and out to change the roundness of my rectangle. Now there's a rounded rectangle tool, which we'll get into later, but that one's available there. So if I want to just edit one of them, I can double click and it pulls up the transform panel, and under rectangle properties we can get the corner radius set up. And the book wants us to type in 0.15. And with that lock selected, it should change all of them right there. And so everything's equal at an exact corner radius. And I can just exit out. And then we're going to actually only have parts of them selected. So we're going to just double click on the top of those corner radiuses. So the top part is going to be nice and flat. So we're going to go to our direct selection tool, keyboard shortcut A. It's that white arrow. And we're going to get sort of finite details. We're going to double click those widgets, kind of like before. But we're going to change that radius over to 0. And we're going to do the same for the right. So it's only changed part of them. So we're going to go back to our selection tool, change the fill of this actually from white to black, because it's going to be a full black satellite. And now we have a nice shape right there. And we're going to create another rounded rectangle. So we could just do another rectangle and copy it there. So instead of actually just copying this shape and planting it through there, we're going to use the rounded rectangle tool, which is in this drop-down menu, rounded rectangle tool. I'm going to change my fill to black. And the book wants us to make it a height of 2 inches and a width of 1.1 approximately. So that's going to be bigger than our current shape. And we're going to draw it out. I may need to zoom out a bit. I'm actually going to zoom out a little because I've made it way too big and I need to be able to see where it goes. I did a Command R to bring up my rulers. The 2013 book has you do that. But this 2015 book doesn't. I like to work with my rulers on. If you want to turn them on, you go to View Rulers, Hide Rulers or Show Rulers, or just Command R. I'm just going to bring that shape back in. There we go, height of 2 and a width of 1.1. And it doesn't have to be exact. I had it. And before I release my mouse, I can use my up and down on my keyboard to increase and decrease the amount of radius that curve. And we're going to actually edit it. So we're going, if you kind of highlight over, it should tell you what the widgets are if you drag, and we want a 0.05. So just a very slight curve. And sometimes it's difficult, especially if you're using like a blue or a black background you can't see. You can always go to View Outline and then make your adjustments there. Go back to Preview. And there's actually some other cool things you can do with your widgets here, is what they're called, or corners. So if we pull, sometimes there is, if you look in the book on page 84, step 4, it has sort of these corner type buttons in the control panel. If they're not there, you can actually press this shape button and you can kind of drag down if you want it to be sort of this scalloped edge, this sort of wide one, but we want them to be round. Here you could also type in the measurements for the radius. You could have some being scalloped and not. So I think that's pretty cool. You have all these options. So we're going to actually do a swatch library on this. There's a lot of stuff to them, but we're just kind of touching them, and you should definitely play with them. So we're going to go to Window, Swatch Libraries, patterns. Benny says hi again. That's my dog. He's got a lot of stuff to say. So you'll hear him throughout these lectures. Basic graphics, and then we're going to go with graphics lines. And it's going to bring up a dialog box. And there's a bunch of cool different textures and patterns. We're looking for 10 LPI 90% swatch. I'm sure there's someone outside, and he does not like it. He's growling. What's going on there, Benny? So we're looking for that 10 LPI and a 90 swatch. And you kind of need to hover over right there. And so it does a pattern for us to look at. And so you can play around with some other swatches on your own time just to see what they have there. But this is what we're going to use for this part of this selection. And it works like a fill. So we had the black fill, and then it attached these lines on, which are actually transparent, and you'll notice that later. So we're going to kind of exit out of this and take our selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and we're going to make this horizontally centered using our smart guides over. And you don't want too much distance. The book says kind of go off of what it roughly sees like in its figure on page 85. And we're going to make a copy, so we're going to do an Option or Alt drag over. And you'll notice he has a lot of stuff to say. But these bottom brackets over here, underneath the shape, that's kind of the equal distance between them. So you want it to be equal distant to the shape we have in the center, and then you also want it to be horizontally aligned. So Smart Guides kind of helps us take care so we're not guessing around saying, oh no, is this quite there or not? We're going to actually take this rectangle that we made earlier, and we're going to play with it in a bit. We're going to move it down there. So we're going to create an ellipse, and we're actually going to make kind of a half shape with it, which is pretty fun. I'm just going to do a Command S to save our progress. So we're going to pull up our ellipse tool. It is nested up under here with all of our other tools, but I'm going to do a keyboard shortcut L to jump straight through it. You can draw it out like that, but we need a very specific measurement. So I'm just going to do a click in the area, and we need a width of 1.25 and a height of 0.3. And if we go to our selection tool, we can rearrange it. We want it to be kind of nice and centered right there. I nudge up a little bit. And it's going to kind of snap to this edge left and right. If you can kind of see those magenta points right there. Cool, and it kind of snaps. So when we look at the shape, we have our corners, we have our center point where we can kind of drag around. And then there's going to be a pi angle widget is what the book calls it. And it's this tool here. So if you see my cursor over it, it looks kind of like a Pac-Man. And you can kind of drag this over, and it's going to section out. And you can see in our measurement box it has measurements, and we want it to be 180. And again, it's kind of hard to get it just right, so we can always go into adjustments. So we're going to go pull up shape in our control panel, that orangey color. And you want to make sure your shape is selected right there to pull up those edits, and do 180. And it's going to be right there. And what we're going to do is we're just going to drag this straight down where it intersects in the center, and we're going to actually make this a gray. It's going to be 50 black. And yep, still has a stroke. Sometimes I forget things have strokes or not, so I always go back and forth. So the next part is we're going to work at the bottom of this satellite that we're creating. And so we're not going to continue with creating a circle in the textbook. We're jumping to page 88 and to 92. And we're going to creating, editing, polygons. So we're just going to scroll to the bottom of this. And we're going to go with our polygon tool. There's not a keyboard shortcut. Kind of right there. And we're going to create a triangle. And the book has us jumping from artboard to artboard, but we actually only really need one. So we can just work right here. So it wants us to turn off the smart guides. And we're just going to hit D on our keyboard, which defaults white fill, black stroke. And we're going to go into outline mode too. So we can work on outline so we're not kind of confused. Now if you draw a polygon, it's many shape, poly, many, gon shape. And you can go up and down on your cursor. And if you hold down shift, it kind of straightens it out. We're going to make a triangle. And we're just going to draw this shape that we can. And we're going to draw it like this. Then we're going to adjust the size later. Sorry, one of my neighbors sings when she walks her dog, and it's picking up on this mouse and this microphone. And it's very distracting. So we're going to go out of, we're going to turn these smart guides back on. And we're going to do this next step. So this, some people had questions on it. We're going to do that radius widget again. And it's this little pie shape there that you pull in and out. Sometimes you grab this, which gives you those rounded edges, but we don't want rounded edges. And we want the radius to be 32. So depending on the size of your shape, you're growing it or shrinking it. Close enough. It's not going to be exact with my mouse, and try the best I can. We're going to take the center part and try to align it back to the center right here of this. And we're going to actually kind of nudge it in a little. So it's kind of tucked in. And you want it to be aligned with that. Alright, looks about good. And we're going to actually go off the outlines. So we're going to go back to preview. And if you're curious, we're at page 92. And we are going to actually nest, actually we're at page 90. This up under it, and we're going to actually zoom in. So we're going to kind of put an edge to it. And you know, this is, let's go back to outline. It's going to be easier once we're in outline. So what you're going to do is you're going to have these anchor points nested up to anchor points. So the book has you do like hold on to command to pull up the direct selection tool temporarily, but we're just going to go back to direct selection tool, keyboard shortcut A. Try this anchor point where it kind of hovers and says anchor, and you want it to kind of nest over to the other anchor point if you can. And this part gets a little tricky. And you keep moving things by accident, always do a Command Z. There we go. We can adjust those points later. There we go. And that looks pretty lined up. It may take you a few moments to kind of get it just right. And once it's nice and lined up, we're going to go to preview. And as you can see, those little corners are not really working. So we're going to get our selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, select our triangle, and we're going to take this stroke up to, I believe, 5. Yeah. And we're going to pull down the stroke menu, and we're going to align stroke inside, so it's in the inside of the shape. So it's not pulling on the outside. We're going to take the color of the stroke to be this dark gray, which is going to be K80, and we're going to make the stroke fill black. So it looks pretty cool. And for this shape, we're going to select the rectangle below. We're going to make the stroke none and the fill black. And as you can see, it kind of nests up. And I'm going to select both of these shapes, which is kind of drawing a box. We're going to arrange send to back. And I'm actually going to just select both and use my keyboard to nudge them down a bit. And the inside stroke didn't actually go to 5. Here we go. Now I can arrange around. You want the kind of black triangle to be sticking out, but not all the way. And here we've created our satellite. Now if we're on page 92, it kind of plays around with scale. So we're just going to select all of it that we can. And we're going to go to Object, Transform Each. So we're transforming each of them, and there's certain settings in the textbook for set 7. 50 horizontal, 50 vertical, and then the angle to be -30. And it didn't do how I wanted it to. So I forgot to group them, so I'm going to do a Command G to group everything together. Now if I didn't group them, they're not going to transform with each other. There we go. And we can eventually rearrange this throughout. And this is our satellite. And before we move on, we're going to make a moon type shape, and we're on page 94 using the shaper tool. So what we're going to do is kind of zoom in right about here. And the shaper tool is here. It's kind of this pencil tool with the circle that's underneath the pencil, might be over there. The shaper tool creates shapes out of things you draw. So if I draw a circle, it draws a circle and it kind of matches it up. Nice big oval. I can do triangle, I can do a rectangle. If I don't want some, I can kind of scribble it out and say, I don't want it. So we kind of have an oval, and what we're going to do is we're going to edit it. So we're going to click on this with the shaper tool, and you can see we kind of can move things that way, pull it in and out. If it's got these crosshairs, that means it's going to be actually a perfect circle that we want, which I think is pretty cool. What we're going to do is going to open up this transform panel to get an exact size. We want it to be about 1.2. Hit this link button. It's going to constrain both of them. And now we have a perfect circle, and we need to kind of make some divots. So if you look back here, we've got some parts chunking out and then some circles on. So with our shaper tool, we're going to create 6 circles. It doesn't matter if they're perfect or not. So 1, 2, 3, 3. And sometimes they'll tell you, hey, you didn't make a full shape. 3, 4, 5, 6. Now with these tools, I can take chunks out by just doing a scribble, and it kind of wants you to do like every other. Now since I only did part of it is still there, and I can just scribble under there to make sure each part is taken out. And if I want to add these to this, I can scribble in, scribble in, scribble in. So I got parts that chunked out, and I can even adjust these shapes because the shapes are still there. And if I click on them, you can see the bounding box right there. I can adjust the size, the location, things that, you know, maybe I want it to be nice and flat and just have a nice unique look to it. I think this one right here might be a bit too tall. There you go. So I'm pretty comfortable with it. If I zoom out, I have my satellite and my moon that I built with the shaper tool. So this is the first part that we've completed. I hope this kind of answered some questions and helps you build on for this unit. So stay tuned next. We're going to build the background of this, working on the star, the night sky, and whatnot. And Benny will be here still. So I'll see you soon. Bye.